Good afternoon, Flagstaff. I'm Paul Kolpinski, and I'm here as your host for this afternoon for the next installment of the Career Exploration Series. And today our guest is Maisie El-Ters, and she is a forensic investigator with the Coconino County Medical Examiner's Office, and she's here to talk to us about all of the things that go on in her office and all of the exciting things that you probably want to know about what's real in the world of criminal investigation and what's just myth. So welcome, Maisie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So Maisie, what I wanted to do was to start by recognizing that there are a lot of people out there that have seen forensic investigation on like television dramas or movie dramas. And there's some truth out there about what your job actually is like, and there's some myth. So can you start by setting up the understanding about what happens in your work and in general with the medical examiner's office, whether it's in Coconino County or in most medical examiner's office? What is the process from going on scene and doing all of that investigation and bringing the work back to the office and everything like that? Can you start us?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the investigators, at least in our office, there's at least one investigator that's on 24 hours, because people don't die on a schedule, right? So we answer our on-call phone if someone has a death, and from there we can decide whether or not that person needs an investigation or not. It varies a lot on those kind of specifics, and unfortunately it's pretty much impossible at this point anyway, in my experience, to really be able to explain. There's no like black and white set in stone way to differentiate between one or the other. So we'll get a call if it needs an investigation. We'll get any information we can from the contacting official, whether that's the hospital, law enforcement, anyone who's calling us. We'll go out to the scene, no matter the time, day or night, rain or shine. Most often the officials at the scene know to leave the person and kind of the area as intact as possible, because we have to document everything that's going on to help the doctor finalize their cause and manner of death. So the investigation will take photos of the property or the area that they're found in. We're looking for any type of medication, anything that could contribute to them passing, even if it's quote unquote obvious death in a manner of speaking. We're always looking for alcohol, any sort of medication or drugs that could be associated with their passing. And from there, we also, do a preliminary investigation of the body, checking to make sure there's no trauma that doesn't really fit with what the story is, as well as looking at their livor mortis and rigor mortis to kind of corroborate with the idea of how long they've been dead, right?
So rigor mortis. Help us understand that one.
Okay, sure. Sorry. So the livor mortis is the settling of the blood in the system, or in the body. And, so most often if someone passes away laying on their back, the blood is going to settle towards their posterior side, right? So we'll look for that. If the story says, oh, they were found supine, is how we say, or the verbiage that we use, on the floor, and they've been dead for maybe, 5 hours or 6 hours or something, I think. The blood should be pooling on their back. And depending on how long they've been passing, we'll check to see if that pooling, because you can see it, it's almost like a bruising kind of color. It's like a darker red, pinkish. If you apply pressure to it, does it kind of disperse from that pressure point, or does it stay there? So if you press on it and you see your fingerprints in there, it's not settled. So the person hasn't been dead too long. So it's not like set, it's not fixed. But if you press on it and it doesn't blanch, then it's settled and they've been dead a little bit longer than that time frame. It's very arbitrary on the time frame. It's difficult to set it in stone. And then rigor mortis is I'm trying to think of the word, but it's where your muscles contract and they fix. Most of the time you'll hear in autopsy, we break their rigor. So it's just really like loosening up their muscles. And because in the muscle itself, they kind of contract as people pass away. But you can release that connection. And so at the scene, if you try to move someone's arm and it's not moving unless you apply a lot of pressure, then their rigor is fixed, meaning that they've been dead a certain amount of time. What's troubling or what's difficult with rigor is it can either not be fixed because they've been dead for a shorter period of time, so it's setting in, or it could not be there because they've been dead too long. So it also naturally breaks. And again, the time frame is difficult to pinpoint.
You're doing all these things on the scene still when you're at the scene.
Right. Yeah. So we're doing all those once we're moving the body, because we'll take specific photographs of the body, documenting their eyes, their hands, as well as their entire body, as much as we can without, messing with it too much, because that's really just the preliminary investigation. Once we remove the body and bring them back to our office, then the autopsy is performed, and that's when the doctors, that's where when the doctor's there, the technician's present, and they're the two that do the actual full body investigation, sort of, where they're documenting the clothing, they're removing all the clothing, they're looking at every part of the body without the clothing, right? So they're able to look at any other signs of trauma that maybe we weren't able to see at the scene, because they're able to move and maneuver the body a lot more than we can at the scene, just because of preserving the evidence from the person, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that. And so the autopsy is performed, and once that's performed at our office, we send off toxicology specimens, which is typically blood, vitreous, which is from the eye, and urine. Those three samples are most often the three most useful samples that can be collected, that can give you a really good reading on what was in the person's system about when they passed away. Of course, it's not set in stone on this is the exact level, because there's all of the natural forms of decomposition and like levels of things within the body that happen the moment you die, you know, like your body just doesn't freeze and stay that way forever. So, but it gives you a good reading on, you know, any drugs, alcohol, even caffeine shows up on it, you know, all of the things that were in that person's system, we can at least get a good idea on what it is. And most often, if it's high enough, you know, of certain drugs or something, the doctors are able to use that to attribute to a possible cause or like something that added to their death in a sense. Yeah.
Talking with Maisie El-Ters. She's a forensic investigator with the Coconino County Medical Examiner's office. And we're taking your questions. So type into the chat box, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube, type into the chat and we'll get your question to Maisie for her to answer. So she's going to be with us for this session today on our career exploration series. So Maisie, all of this work that you're doing on the scene and bringing the body back to the examiner's office so that the autopsy can be done, the idea is that you're trying to find out what the cause of death actually was. Is that why we do all of this?
Yes. As far as I'm aware, yeah. You know, a lot of the times, in our case anyway, a lot of the decedents that we end up bringing in, you know, sometimes don't have a lot of medical history. So, you know, if they had any natural diseases, sometimes people wouldn't know. And so a lot of the times we find out for family members, you know, one, so that they can have that closure for their loved one, as well as, you know, we can notify them of any diseases that could be passed down genetically, you know, and something that family members can follow up on if they're at risk for something similar, you know. So yeah, it's really to, you know, in like a natural-ish case, is to get that closure for the family as well as get those answers. That way their family can be safe and taken care of, just in case there are anything that could be taken down from them.
So here's a question from Mary. She wants to know, how did you get interested in this career?
Sure. That's a good question. I, as a little kid, I had always had an interest in, not necessarily dead things, but I had an eye for learning about mummies. I remember specifically. My dad had National Geographics, and they had occasionally they had like mummies special ones, which I found really fascinating. But you know, you don't have to be in love with mummies and stuff to get into this field. Really, it's I kind of just stumbled upon it, I guess, you know, because when I started college, I didn't know I wanted to be around deceased people or anything. I wanted to be in a lab looking at, you know, microscopic pathogens and stuff. And luckily, through my experience, both at the college I went to and this internship at this county that I got, I learned that I wasn't interested in that kind of lab work, and I was more interested in this kind of lab work, you know. So it was really kind of just something I stumbled upon, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get education that kind of helped me into it, including like anthropology, biology, and criminology. But it really, you know, you kind of, if you have a passion for it, you're able to pursue it or try it out, you know. Like, again, a lot like our county, and I know a couple of other counties, I understand, have internship programs, that ours unfortunately is unpaid, but it's, you know, you can get hours, you can get volunteer credit for it. And you can learn both autopsy, administrative, and investigations type of work here. So, and you can we give that option to feel it out and see if it's a right fit for you. Yeah.
So I understand that when you first went there to explore what it might be like to have an internship, you didn't think you wanted to do that at first, right? Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. Right. So this county office recently moved buildings. We used to be in a very small, not great office. So when I ended up, I was able to get a tour of the facility, and at the time they had the areas for our saved samples of tissue for later investigations if we needed it. And sorry, I was able to experience the smell of, formalin and formaldehyde to a point, in addition just to the kind of smell that comes with autopsy. And it's not the greatest, but it's also not bad. So when I first did that tour, I was a little bit younger. I think I was in high school, and yeah, I thought it was. I didn't think it was right for me, even just from that smell. Like I was like, I don't know if I can do that, And so yeah, even if you have like a weirder initial reaction to it, it might not be as bad as you think, or like once you get the experience and exposure, it's a lot different than an initial reaction, sort of.
So
Yeah.
you mentioned that you had an opportunity to tour the facility while you were in high school, to just test it out. So at that point, you were already starting to think about maybe some majors in college, right?
Yeah.
And I understand you have 3 degrees. And can you tell us a little bit about the study that you did? And is that necessary to do the work that you're doing today?
Sure. Yeah. So yes, I started my career in criminology at the county community college here. I originally wanted to go into, before even the lab stuff, I wanted to be like an FBI agent, all the cool stuff they do. And so I wanted to go into the criminology route because I thought, that side of people and that side of the world kind of was really fascinating. And so with that, I did end up majoring in criminology, in addition to anthropology, because I was tuning into that mummy kind of fantasy or interest. And then once I was pretty much done with those 2, I ended up getting this internship because I found out, that I was possibly interested in a forensic pathway. And the college that I was, the grad school that I was looking at to go into this specific field that's not related to my current job, required a natural science degree, which was biology, physics, not anthro or criminology, unfortunately. But that pushed me to do that 3rd major. But those 3 majors don't have to be necessary. I think I'm learning that it really just depends on the office, with where you want to get hired at. I know, our office is really big on training, like when I had my internship, I was able to learn autopsy techniques, including evisceration and floating in that sense, without even ever holding a scalpel blade or even having a knowledge of human anatomy. You know, they all really, because I showed that interest and that passion, they were really open to training me and having me learn those techniques and learning everything, even without a background in medicine. So, and I think it just depends on, again, the program and the location, whether or not you need a college degree. That one varies, I believe. But I know, at least for our internship, it really, because a lot of the time our interns are from NAU, the local university, and most of the time, you know, kind of like not necessarily a required major, but just a major that is associated with this line of work in a way, whether that's anthropology, criminology, bio, or like public health. You know, those are kind of like what we look for in a sense. So it would be good to have a background in those types of fields, just so that you're on kind of the same track, instead of having like a business degree and then you're doing autopsies. It doesn't fit well, but it's not impossible, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks, Maisie. We're talking with Maisie El-Ters. She is a forensic investigator with the Coconino County Medical Examiner's office here in Flagstaff. And if you have a question for Maisie, we want to hear what you want to know. You can type in your question into the chat box of either Facebook or YouTube, because we're YouTube and Facebook streaming live at the moment. And so Maisie, Marcos wants to know, what's the most fascinating thing you've learned about the human body from your work?
Sure. A lot, honestly. I mean, you know, again, I came from a background of not knowing anything about the human body, you know, and, you know, it's fascinating how extremely similar we are, you know, on the inside. Same organs, pretty much same locations, you know, same way to do the autopsies in a sense. But it's also really fascinating on how different we are in like the slightest ways. You know, like it's strange, but you know, we look at the sizes of different organs, you know, and the sizes of organs, depending on if they're really large or really small, you know, those are investigated in possibly how they passed away, you know, whether it's the size is because of, you know, something that's like it's just like a natural disease, or, you know, if there's like liver disease from a lot of drinking, you know, the damage that people do to their insides varies so greatly, but are also like the same. It's really fascinating in the similarities and differences. And it's also really fascinating learning about the levels of decomposition and how there's like no one way to decompose, you know, like, oh my gosh, there's so many factors and so many things that play into decomposition that it's so fascinating to see how different people go through that process. You know, it's of course a very sad and not like a great thing, you know, decomposition and all of that. It's a little ugly in a manner of speaking. But from like a science perspective, it's fascinating to see what the environment can do to a body, you know, in that sense. So it's all it's fascinating. but again, it's very sad.
Yeah, but
So,
all of
yeah.
those factors you were just talking about help you to determine the manner of death and all of those things that you were talking about at the start of our conversation, right?
Mhm.
So being in the fact that in Arizona we're a very dry climate, that's going to impact how a body decomposes, right? Versus if it were humid or if they were in water,
Right.
for example, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, all of those factors vary, and in Flagstaff where it snows, where it gets colder, that also changes it. Like if you were to compare, Coconino County to Maricopa County, in Phoenix, they get people who decompose very quickly just because of the extreme heat that they experience there, while like our bad decomposed body, is almost like a week or so. That's like our range of um, level, while they could be, this person has passed away and they've been gone for maybe 8 hours, but they've been sitting outside or they've been in their car in the sun, and it's almost like the same level of decomposition just because of the different environments that they're in. So yeah, so it varies so greatly.
So seeing all of this stuff, this has got to be difficult. And Hannah wants to know, how do you handle the emotional part of seeing all of this on a regular basis? What do you do to take care of yourself? Are there some techniques that you use just to um, um, keep your emotional state in balance?
Of course, yeah, it's definitely hard, and it's hard, um, helping the families and everyone through this really hard time for them, Um, but for me, I exercise a lot, um, uh, and I spend a lot of time with my husband and my dog that we recently got. So, just kind of keeping family and loved ones close, because we know almost firsthand how short life can be, and we try to use that to try to live our fullest in the time that we have, So, yeah,
That's also good advice. Thanks, Maisie. So we're
sure.
talking with Maisie El-Ters. She's a forensic investigator with the Coconino County Medical Examiner's Office. And if you have a question for Maisie, type it into the chat box and we'll get your question forwarded to Maisie so she can answer it while we're live streaming right now. So Maisie, one of the things that I've always been fascinated with, watching movies or dramas about like crime
Mhm.
scene, and you see all the investigators in the room, and it's a crowded room full of investigators dusting for fingerprints or all these sort of things. I don't know what's real, what it's really like versus what the movies
Mhm.
are showing. So are there some obvious ones that you've seen in watching movies and whatnot where you go, oh yeah, no, that's totally wrong? Can you think of some
Eh,
examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So, from my experience, um, some differences at the scene, the medical examiner is, or well, the investigator anyway, is almost like the last person on the scene. Most often it's the detectives, the officers that are the first responders, really. Um, they're typically they typically do their investigation, of the scene and what they can of the person without changing the scene or damaging anything, so that we can still do our scene investigation. But by the time that we get there, I've seen in movies and stuff where there's all of that caution tape, and there's like crowds and crowds of people, and that I've never seen that. Usually it's a very um, well maintained set of area. I don't need to show my badge to anyone like, hey, I need to get in here, like usually it's just, okay, yeah, we're here. I know at suspicious cases and whatnot, there are officials there that do take your name and information and they log everyone who comes in, their time that they come in and when they leave. So those processes are there. And maybe that is what kind of eliminates that crowding that happens. So I know that one's maybe a little bit exaggerated, at least in our office, what we experience. And then the largest differences are in exam mostly, because you see all the technicians or pathologists back there like eating their pasta right over an open body, and it's just like, no, not at all. I mean, even in our autopsy suite, we clean it really well. We disinfect it. We do everything we can to keep it clean. But that doesn't mean that it's clean. It's still been touched by gross things. So even like when there's no exam going, when there's nothing back there that could potentially be a problem, I don't bring beverages back there. I don't bring anything that would touch, like be ingested back there ever at all. Even if I'm in passing, if I'm doing something that I have to go back there, I put it down, because either I'm going to end up having to touch something, which means I put on gloves, and then where do I put my coffee, so yeah, that eating in there, no. Along with that, we don't touch anything without gloves back there.
Yeah, so can you go on as to what type of protective gear you actually do use? Because one of the other myths I've seen is, people going in to see an exam with just, their street clothes on.
Yeah, no. Right. So yeah, we wear scrubs, and then if you're going to be working on the body, we wear like an impervious gown. That's kind of just like this plastic, almost like a surgical gown, that people wear. If you're going to be doing books, which is where you're just taking the notes down that the doctor says, or like the organ weights, we have like reusable smocks because you're not going to get that dirty. So we don't want to waste that much protective equipment if we don't have to. We wear booties, like shoe covers, and if you're doing books or whatnot, you'll typically wear 2 to 3 layers of Nitrile Gloves. We have like 2 different kinds, and I always forget what kind they are. But like they're just a thinner, normal kind of glove. And then you wear a face mask and a face shield. Even if you're not working on that, it still can, get messy in a sense. Plus you're also cleaning afterwards, and you don't want to splatter like dirty water into your face. And then if you are working on the body, again, you wear the impervious gown. You'll wear, typically how I would set up, I would wear like a lower, 1 layer of gloves, and then cut gloves, which protect against you accidentally like cutting yourself with the scissors or slicing yourself with a scalpel blade. Just extra protection, and then over that we wear like almost not really elbow long, but a lot longer and thicker outer gloves that are a lot more durable than like the other gloves. We'll also wear arm guards just to protect like this area, in addition to the face covering and like the hair covering things. Yes.
So here's a question. Sarah wants to know, how long does an exam typically take when you're doing the actual autopsy? And what's the most difficult part of it?
Sure. So it does vary. It depends on whether the case is suspicious and if like evidence needs to be collected, or if x-rays need to be taken. Those usually, those go before the actual autopsy. And those usually take the longest. But in a general autopsy, it could take an hour to 2 hours, depending on who's back there and kind of what the plan is for the day. I know I have a coworker who used to work at Maricopa, and they have such a high demand, unfortunately, that they are able to do them very, very quickly, just because of how many cases they need to get done during the day. While here at this office, we're very fortunate and we don't have to rush in a sense, not saying that Maricopa rushes or anything, just saying like we're able to take our time. So which is why it takes around 2 hours. The longest part of it is probably the external examination, because we have to, that's just the time where we have to document a lot of things. We have to document clothing, property, we have to photograph it all. The doctor is doing a lot of body examination and manipulations to see what he can find, in addition to extensive photographs before we do anything to the decedent, So with that being said, the internal examination is typically pretty streamlined, because that's where it just gets, we're all working, we get it done in a sense. But in cases where we do find something that we need to document, where we need to photograph it, that can kind of slow it down, but it's not too big of a deal if we find something in there, because obviously we need to document it. We need to make sure that's represented within their exam, and the doctor represents that, if that answers it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's fascinating to know, because again, this is like this hidden world for most people that we can only guess what's actually happening.
Sure, yeah.
To know that there are real people that are doing this work is amazing to me, anyway.
Yeah.
We're talking with Maisie El-Ters. She's a forensic investigator with the Coconino County Medical Examiner's office, and we're taking your questions live on Facebook and YouTube. And Zach has a question, and he wants to know, as an investigator, are you the one that has to do the autopsies, or are they two different roles?
Sure, yeah. So most often they're two separate entities. Usually there's the investigator, who is the person who responds to the scene, does the scene investigation and picks up the body and brings them back to our office. And then there's the forensic technician, who is has been associated as like an autopsy assistant. They're the ones who are performing the autopsy, and assisting the pathologist and the doctor that's back there with them. So they're the ones that are typically, the technician is the one doing, the photographs, the books, the specimen collection, packaging, and preparing for send out to our lab. And then the doctor, the pathologist that's back there, also does part of the autopsy in the sense of, examining the body both externally and internally, and doing dissections of each organ to look for any findings, anything that could be associated with their passing. So that's kind of the difference between the investigators and the technicians. Yeah.
So when you think about the skill sets that you're using, that you have to use every day, are there some key skills that you say, oh, I'm so glad that I'm good at this because this is so critical for me being effective at this job, right? Are there some of those
Sure.
skills that you can really point to that you find really useful?
Sure. I mean, you know, it's hard because it's, in a way, it's just like any other job where if you have a passion, if you have a drive for what you're doing, you can learn it. You can become fluent in this kind of world. But also for me, I'm really grateful that one, am good at compartmentalizing in a sense, because it is hard. It's a hard world to live in every day. I, along with my coworkers, we're able to keep it at work, so that's one thing that I'm grateful for, that I have the ability to do. I don't really know where that comes from in a sense, if that's like a skill or if that's just, a learned behavior, in a sense, as well as empathy, with that compartmentalization, you want to still be able to put yourself in the family and the loved ones shoes to a point to be able to explain to them these processes in a way that they'll understand and still feel like their loved one that passed away is being taken care of and isn't just in a garage somewhere, like that they're taken care of and they're in a safe place still, so those are the two kind of main ones that I find really beneficial, is just to be able to put myself in those shoes and try to connect with families on that level as an investigator. Yeah.
So if you were to, if a student were wondering right now, well, I'm curious about this. What advice would you give a student, maybe in middle school or in high school, who kind of said, well, I'm interested in biology, or crime science is of interest to me? What advice would you give them at this point, as you're looking back where you were in high school and middle school, that you would say, well, read about this or try this or ask about this? Is there something that you might offer for advice?
Sure. Yeah. If you're interested in it, always like reach out to those agencies. I also, you can do, at least in Flagstaff, you can do like ride-alongs with the police department or even DPS. You can sit in and talk to the officers and troopers out there to see what they do and kind of get a feel for what their possibly typical shift looks like, and then from there, I don't know about their internship opportunities, but you can always ask about that. And I know here, all that we really require is that you're 18 years or older to be an intern here. But you're always still, as far as I'm aware, more than welcome to call and see if you can even get a tour, or just like an informational interview with our pathologists here. They're both very friendly gentlemen and very knowledgeable. And anyone is willing to answer questions and share what we have at this office, at least, because we want to do that community outreach. We want to show that we're a group of people that care about the community, and I know Starla, the main technician here, she does some talks at NAU about medical examiner type work. They mainly talk to the nurses at, or the nurses department at NAU. But I know that, you know, people are welcome to that, or, you know, everyone loves to kind of share what this world has to offer in a sense. So I would just say, like, don't hesitate to reach out and test the waters in a sense. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you for opening up that invitation by answering a bunch of questions today, Maisie.
Of course.
Again, it's a world that so few of us are even aware of the realities of, and what you've shared today has been so enlightening. So I want to say thank you for spending the time with us this afternoon, and wish you the best in this work. And keeping yourself safe out there, because, you know, there's a lot of unknowns around transmission of COVID-19. And I know you guys are all taking good care for that protection, like you were describing. So I just want to wish you well and stay safe out there.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm glad I got to share a little bit out there. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So join us next week, Dr. Aaron Tabor. He's a biomedical science researcher, author, and professor. He's going to be joining us next week. We'll talk about how his research is helping to change medicine and our understanding of the living human body. So that'll be next week at 3 o'clock on Thursday on Facebook and YouTube. And until then, we look forward to seeing you then. Thanks. Bye-bye.